الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So last week we finished talking about the second misconception that the kuffâr use to try to justify what they do or what types of shirk that they do, and that second misconception was they state that when we make inkar or we rebuke or we say that what they're doing is wrong and these types of acts of shirk or statements of shirk are wrong, they say the evidence that you're using from the Quran to prove that what we're doing is wrong, these are actually verses that were revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding kuffar, regarding people who never entered into Islam and never claimed to be Muslim and had never said La ilaha illallah or anything like this. So how can you take these ayat and then apply them to people who say that they're Muslimin and say the Shahada, and some of them will have prayed and so on and so on. So they say this is a false use or a false usage of evidence, in that this doesn't apply to this. And alhamdulillah, we mentioned or we talked a lot about what the author had used to refute this. And alhamdulillah, we came to see that evidence in the Quran, it doesn't matter who it was revealed for. What it comes down to is, what was it revealed for? What is the action or the statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is judging upon? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges that a certain statement is wrong, then it doesn't matter who it comes from. And if it came from someone who claims Islam or someone who claims Judaism or anything like this, it doesn't really make a difference. The statement still has the same ruling. And likewise, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judged that people left Islam for a statement that they said or an action that they said, or that they were deserving of being in Jahannam forever because of a certain statement or action that they said or did, then it doesn't matter the person who said it, whether they're Muslim or not, because we're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judged on an action or a statement. He didn't judge or He didn't restrict it to the person who it was revealed for. So this was essentially what the author mentioned for the refutation or the answer towards this misconception. So this was the second one that the author mentioned in his book. The next misconception, he says, is it's the third one. And like we talked about before, this book revolves, or it's mostly around these first three misconceptions. And the author will, as we'll come to see, that he says that these are the three strongest misconceptions that the kuffar have. And if someone is able to understand them and refute them, then the other ones come a lot easier. So the third misconception is that these kuffar will say that when we make dua to these people, or we make dua to these sites, whether it's a grave or whether it's at a holy place that they call a holy place due to a tree or due to their land that they're in or whatever it may be, that when they go and seek from or they perform these acts of worship in these areas, they're not seeking from these people themselves. They're seeking from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're saying that we accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who creates and the only one who benefits and the only one who can bring about harm and the only one who sustains, and so on. So we're not intending them in and of themselves, we're intending Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and these are intermediaries between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as you'll see, this misconception is very, very similar to the first misconception of the three. So the first misconception was that because they don't believe about these statues or these idols or these people who they worship other than Allah, because they don't believe that these things have any of the attributes of rububiyyah or lordship, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who creates and sustains and so on, because we don't believe these things about these idols, then what we're doing is fine. So that's what the first misconception is. This third one, what it is that it's not coming down to beliefs now. What they're saying is that because we're not seeking something from them directly, we're seeking it from Allah. So we're placing them between us. That's what makes it fine. So there's a fine line in the difference between the two. but there is a difference. So, and this difference, it complies with the beliefs of Ahl-Sunnah wal-Jamâ'ah in that Iman is on the tongue and on the body and in the heart, and likewise kufr can be on the tongue and in the heart and on the body. So as we see from these two shubha, or these two misconceptions, one of them relates to beliefs. So they say, well, because we don't believe this in our heart, the action doesn't have this effect. The second one is where they're differentiating between two different actions. So this is, so if someone sees these misconceptions and says, I don't really get the difference, that's not completely unheard of, just because they are so similar in their nature. So that's the actual difference between the two. So then he says that the answer to this misconception, and again, many of the ayat that we talk about here also applied to the first shubha. So he says, the answer to this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. Or that in Surah Az-Zumar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the kuffar of Quraysh, that their statement is that those who they worship besides Allah, or those who we take as allies instead of Allah, we don't worship them except that they would bring us closer to Allah. So they're admitting that they're only doing this to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The end goal isn't these idols, or isn't these awliya, or these sayyid, or whatever they call them. Their end goal, or what they're trying to reach, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He's judging on them as being kuffar. So the fact that they made this claim didn't make a difference. And also that they would say, هَؤُلَاءِ شُفَعَاؤُنَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, or that when they would worship these idols, they would say, these are our interceders with Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judged upon them as being kuffar, and He sent His Prophet to them to call them to Islam and to fight the ones who didn't accept and who were stubborn and fought back against the Muslimin. So all of this took place with people who were doing the exact same thing that they're claiming. So this claim that, well, we're not intending them, we're intending Allah through them, this was the same action as the actions of the kuffar of Quraysh. So again, pretty much everything that we talked about before applies to this shubha as well. So I won't go over it again, just because it's just to save time. Whoever wants can go back to their notes or to the recording of those lessons. So that's the end of the third shubha, or the third misconception. So to recap them, because the author says that these are the strongest ones that they have. The first, like I said, is they say that, well, we don't believe about these things what we believe about Allah. The second one is they say that the ayat that you're using don't apply to Muslimin, or don't apply to someone who claims Islam, because they were revealed for people who didn't claim Islam. And the third one is that these actions aren't matters of shirk, because we're not intending them. Our goal isn't them, our goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the first three and strongest misconceptions that people will try to use. And like I said before, for those of us who have only spent their time in the masajid, or spent their time with Ahl-Sunnah wal-Jamâ'ah, whether in our homes or with our friends, we might find it strange why anyone would even need to talk about these things, because it would seem like, why would anyone make dua to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or how could anyone have these misconceptions, because they seem so ridiculous? Like, why would you put something between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? But as I talked about before, these misconceptions have remained for hundreds of years, and Allahul Musta'an, they're spreading in our city. Some of the masajid openly endorse these things, and other ones endorse them in secret, and in a number of the post-secondary places, Grant McEwen and U of A, these things are spreading. And people, there's no one really talking about them. They just kind of let it go like it's not going on, or maybe they don't know it's wrong, or maybe they know it's wrong but don't know how to kind of answer back to these things. So this is kind of the reason why we're putting so much emphasis on it, because it is actually going on and taking place in amongst us. So this is the third shubha. The fourth is, the author says that it's possible that someone, or one of these mushrikeen or these kuffar, will say to you, I don't worship anyone except Allah. And these things that we seek from, or we look for help from these righteous people, and when we make dua to them, this isn't actually ibadah. So this is the next thing that they say. They say that what we're doing isn't even ibadah now. So as you see, the arguments start from having like a strong misconception, and each one gets less and less to the point where you can see that each one is more ridiculous than the one that came before it. But here they say that, well, actually dua isn't even worship. So yes, when I make dua, or I make dua to this sayyid, or to this wali, or to this, at this grave or whatever, but it doesn't really matter because this isn't actually worship. So really anything that you bring to show that worshipping other than Allah isn't allowed really doesn't apply to me, because I'm actually not doing that. So that's the next thing that they say. So they say that this is the crux of their argument, and they say that, or that we would say to them. So this is the author saying, if you accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated ikhlas upon you when you worship Him, and that it is His right upon you, obviously this person will say yes, because no one who even claims Islam, regardless of how bad they are, would say that no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't expect me to worship Him sincerely, that I can worship someone else. Then we would say to this person, after he says yes, I accept this, that we say, tell us or explain to us what this ikhlas or what this sincerity is, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects this from you in His worship. So then what we would say to him, if he doesn't know how to answer this, so he says, well, I don't really know the evidence for this, or I don't know the ayat in the Quran that would prove this, but I know that it is something that is obligatory upon him or upon us. Then we would say to him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Ud'u rabbakum tadarru'u wa khufyah," or that in Surah Al-A'raf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, seek or supplicate to your Lord with sincerity and humbleness, or humbleness and out of fear. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is ordering us to do a specific action specifically for Him with specific conditions, so that it should be done with humility and should be done with fear for Him. So then if he says, or then we would say to him, so do you not accept that this is a type of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Then he would say, or it's impossible for him to say no. And the author says the reason for this is because he mentions the part of a hadith that says ad-du'a mukh al-ibadah, or that dua is the essence of worship. And we talked about this when we had our lessons on al-usul al-thalatha, that this hadith, it's narrated by Tirmidhi and others, that it's the Prophet ﷺ said that dua mukh al-ibadah, or that dua is the essence of worship. It's actually a weak hadith. The authentic hadith is ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. So, or that dua is worship. Not that it's a type of worship, it is in and of itself worship. So, or it encompasses what worship is. So this is what he says that we would say to him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the author then continues and says that we would say to him, if you accept that this is an act of ibadah, and you worshipped Allah, or you supplicated to Him night and day out of fear and hope from Him, then after that you sought or you supplicated to a prophet or someone other than Him, then would this mean that you have now performed an act of shirk, or that you have worshipped other than Allah? So it's a must that he would say yes. There's no other way for him to then say no. Because if he's accepted that dua is a type of worship, and that it should only be done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then if you say to him, and if you do this every day, you do this specifically for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you don't do it, you have no intention other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then right after that, you do it for a prophet, so you supplicate to a prophet, have you now made this prophet equal in what you were doing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? There's no way except for him to say yes, because he's already accepted that this is a right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then now he's done it for someone else. So now the point of this type of argument is you don't let the person try to get around the argument and use try to say, well, no, I didn't say that, or I don't mean that, or I didn't accept that, or those types of things. So you, at each step, you say, do you accept this or not? And you put it in a phrase where it's impossible for this person to reject it. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to perform dua to Him, and to do it with humbleness and fear, and the hadith says that dua is ibadah, at this point there's no possible way for them to say that it's not like that. So then you've stuck them to that first point. Then you say, so you do it only for Allah, and then you do it for someone else. Now when you do it for someone else, isn't that the same as when you did it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Obviously he can't then say no. Because, well, what's the difference then? If you did the exact same action for two different causes or two different reasons, in the end it's the same thing. So now you've trapped the person in that sense at that point. So then after that we would say to him, and also when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed these verses regarding these types of things, that these came down for people who would do the same action as you, so that they would worship, or they would perform, or they would supplicate for people or statues, or whether they were alive or dead, they would do this for people and so on. And this is exactly what you're doing as well. So this is essentially what this misconception revolves around. The attempt for these mushrikeen, or these people who perform shirk, to run away from the idea that dua is actually worship. So if you tell them, well, no, the Prophet ﷺ said, not only is it, the Prophet ﷺ didn't say ad-du'a min al-ibadah, or ad-du'a naw'un min al-ibadah. He didn't say that dua is part of ibadah or a type of ibadah. He said it is the ibadah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمْ ادْعُونِي اسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ عَنْ عِبَادَتِي سَيَدْخُلُونَ جَهَنَّمَ دَاخِرِينَ. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and your Lord said, supplicate to me and I will answer you. Indeed, those who refuse or who are stubborn concerning my worship will enter into Jahannam, until the end of the verse. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, commanded us to supplicate to Him, and then said, and those who refuse to worship me will enter Jahannam. So clearly made put dua and ibadah as almost interchangeable in that sense there. So this is the fourth shubha, and inshallah we'll stop there for tonight, and then we'll continue next week. We'll finish this, and then we'll go on to the fifth and probably the sixth, because as we go through each one of these shubuhat, or each one of these misconceptions, gets quite short, so we can probably do 2 or 3 a night. Wallahu a'lam.